And I want to give a big thank you to tonight's panelists for our presentation, representing Rocky Mountain Pier, DeSmog Denver, and GreenLatinos, who you'll hear from shortly. But first, I want to share a few fast facts about the Cherokee plant for context. So I'm going to share my screen again real quick. Give me 1 second. Cool. Alrighty, so the Xcel's Cherokee Generating Station. A few fast facts here. Xcel's Cherokee Station is located just inside the northernmost quarter of Denver, on the edge of what is considered Commerce City. And the pollution affects both Commerce City as well as North Denver environmental justice communities of Glowville, Elyria, Swansea, and more that are located just downwind from the plant. So the Cherokee plant used to be a coal plant. It was converted to gas and stopped burning coal in 2017. But that conversion, burning gas for energy instead of coal, is simply swapping one dirty fossil fuel for another. The Cherokee plant is responsible for releasing methane during the distribution of the gas that's burned at the power plant. And methane is a greenhouse gas. I like to call it a greenhouse gas on steroids because it's 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So even if you're seeing less of it, it has a higher warming potential in a shorter period of time. We do see some CO2 emissions reductions when a plant is converted from coal to gas, as well as reductions in other harmful emissions like mercury and sulfur dioxide. But the warming potential of methane makes gas plants extremely dangerous for our climate as well as our public health, as we'll hear tonight. So next up, I'm going to lead us in a quick activity. You can come up with an answer in your head or feel free to drop it in the chat. How many gas plants do you think Xcel has in Colorado? I'll give you a couple seconds to grab a number and then we'll reveal the answer. All right, a couple guesses coming in, 3, 15, 5. Okay, we got a range. All right. I'm gonna reveal it. All right, next slide. Xcel actually owns 9 gas plants in Colorado, and they lease at least part of an additional 5. So in total, Xcel is partially responsible for burning gas for power at 14 plants across Colorado. And then there are an additional 4 coal plants that Xcel is currently operating. So in total, 18 fossil fuel plants. So this is just to say, as you listen in tonight about the impacts of the Cherokee plant, keep in mind that this is just one out of many gas plants that are spread out across the state. And so the communities of North Denver and Commerce City are definitely unique examples in terms of the severity and the amount of pollution that is concentrated in a small area. But there's many other neighborhoods in our state that are beginning to feel these effects. So with that, I will pass it along to our first panelist this evening, Kevin Bell, who will share what we learned recently from whistleblowers about the Cherokee plant's illegal permit. So Kevin is a staff attorney with Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, a national law office representing public employee whistleblowers with environmental and public health concerns. So yeah, you can take it away, Kevin.
All right, yeah, hi everybody. So like Ren just said, I'm Kevin Bell, I'm an attorney with PEER. I've been working on this issue along with my colleague Chandra Rosenthal, who runs our Rocky Mountain field office in Denver. I'm actually in DC, but yeah, we've been working with a group of whistleblowers at the Air Pollution Control Division at the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. And for, gosh, I guess since like the end of March, so 4 months now, which it started out as a fairly immediate exercise in, we had one significant problem that was happening internally at the agency, which I can get to in a bit, and it sort of ballooned outward from there to include a great number of the various issues which are plaguing Colorado's air pollution right now. So I'll sort of move along through that. So start with the next slide. We entered the arrangement trying to hope that CDPHE would be sort of open to the things that we were saying, that it was, just a couple of individual rogue managers. And, ultimately we found that there is a lot of structural opposition to having any sort of real change to the way the air permitting program works at CDPHE. So the incentive seems to be to basically have as many actual permits approved as possible with as little actual work on the agency as possible. And there are a couple of reasons that we suspect why that is, but I'm don't want to go too far into the weeds on that, because it would distract from the point of this, which is looking at Cherokee itself. But really the core piece of information here is that we moved on. That's fine. No, there wasn't actually any information on the last slide anyway. It was just a meme. But yeah, so we started representing these whistleblowers after they raised a bunch of concerns internally about the fact that there were permits that were being approved without any actual checking done to determine whether or not the permitted construction or modification of sites was actually going to result in a violation of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So let's talk about what those are. Next slide. So before a permit gets approved under the Clean Air Act, the federal law, as well as the Colorado state regulation, which implements that law, it's regulation number 3. So nice round number. But so regulation 3, as well as the Clean Air Act, specify that before a permit can be approved for a facility which is emitting, no, actually, did we skip one? Oh, I think we skipped 2 actually. Nope. Up, other way. Number 7. There we go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so before a permit can actually be issued, you have to attain compliance with what are called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So this is a set of standards which are enshrined by statute and also updated by regulation by EPA, which specify, based on health factors and not the cost of compliance, how much of a given chemical contaminant can be in the air at like what safe threshold for people and the environment to not have any sort of severe health impacts. So the chemicals that, or the air contaminants specifically that they monitor, are carbon monoxide, lead, sulfur dioxide, NOx, which is various oxides of nitrogen, not NO2, which is laughing gas, but one of them is nitrous oxide, one of them is nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide. Okay, not N2O, but NO2. Yeah. So, which is a precursor, along with volatile organic compounds, with the formation of ground level ozone, which has all sorts of health impacts you'll be hearing about from the doctors who know more than I do later. But the ultimate goal is to protect health. And so before a permit is issued, you have to guarantee that if you add this new facility to the inventory of other existing facilities and all the emissions which they have, then it is not going to lead to any sort of undue impact on people's health or go over these thresholds at all. So now we can move on. So what ultimately happened is that there was a buildup over the course of a lot of years, starting back in like 2010, 2011, of bad behavior taking place within CDPHE. I mentioned earlier the sort of culture of permitting at all costs, which actually we could just jump ahead to that slide, which is the next one, that we can sort of see as elaborated in a few emails here. I'm not going to read all of them to you because I'm not that kind of horrible professor that just reads PowerPoint slideshows to you. But basically, these demonstrate a history of individual employees, including our clients. So Rosendo there is Rosendo Mahano, who's one of the whistleblowers that we worked with, raising these concerns about the fact that there were permits going forward, despite the fact that the agency had evidence that there were going to be violations of the air quality standards, and that if new facilities were built in the way that they were being permitted and they went into operation at the levels that were being proposed by their proponents, then the health impacts would get more and more severe, and eventually it was going to lead to downgrading of air quality in Colorado, which we've seen has happened over that period of time. So, like I said, all of these are instances where experts within the agency, including our clients, raised these concerns to their management and were essentially brushed aside by being told that the policy of the agency is to approve permits once they meet some arbitrary cutoff goals about, say, like the annual emissions as opposed to the hourly emissions. So one of the things the National Ambient Air Quality Standards do is they measure how concentrated a chemical contaminant is in one place at one time that actual people are breathing, as opposed to how much gets emitted over the course of, say, a year, which it's difficult to really measure how much that exposure would impact somebody on sort of like a macro or a micro level. Once again, I'm not a doctor, but that's sort of the theory behind it. But let's move on from there and talk about Cherokee itself. So Cherokee, as Ren pointed out, was a coal plant and it became a gas plant. Sort of the center of the inquiry of whether or not its permit is illegal is at the time that it became a gas plant, it had to update its permit. I mentioned earlier any new or modified source, that's the standard in the statute, which says that whenever you want to build a new source or modify an existing source in some substantial way, you have to acquire a new permit under the NAAQS system. So that permit, like I said, has to be preceded by a finding that it's not going to violate the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Well, how do they know if there's going to be a violation or not? They do what's called air quality modeling, which is where they take a mathematical basis of how much contaminants a given site emits and where those contaminants go based on, say, the height of the smokestack or the weight of the chemical compounds that are in the air, the existing chemicals which are in the air, how fast the wind is blowing, the height of the terrain, all sorts of things like that. It's very complicated computer modeling. So this is different from air quality monitoring, which just tells you how much of a given chemical there is at one point at a specific point in time, like one physical point at a specific point in time. So those are like the big trucks that you see driving around that tell you how much SO2 or ozone there is in the air. The modeling tells you, when combined with other sources, how much there probably will be in the air at any given time. And for Cherokee, there were a lot of concerns which came up whenever the gas plant modification was done. And I am going to go through those and sort of point out one at a time how that process happened. So why is it that there is a problem with Cherokee's permit? Well, let's look at the permit file. So next slide. Oh, well, first I did have something in here from so these are maps of all of the sources of a couple of different contaminants. So top left there is NOx, nitrogen oxides, then sulfur dioxide is on the top right, and then different flavors of particulate matter on the bottom. And this shows you on a map which is maintained by the Colorado State Department of Public Health and the Environment. You can basically pick a point on a map and click it, and it'll give you all these little circles showing you where all the sources of emissions are. So I mentioned earlier, before approving a permit, you need to know what the concentration, the background concentration of that contaminant is in an area. And so the point in the middle there where the cross is located is approximately, and I didn't get it perfectly right every time, but that's basically where Cherokee is. It's sort of right in the middle of Commerce City. And you can actually, on your own, if you would really like, go ahead and click that and zoom in, and I've got a link to that, which everybody can sort of futz around with on their own computers while you're at home. So yeah, it's a little bit complicated just because it's a bad UI. You have to click the map at a point and then select your search radius. These are all at 30-kilometer radiuses, and then set the geometry. And then after you hit set geometry, it'll ask you what contaminant you want or which compound. And from there, it will build up this. And you can hover over any of those little green circles and see what the site is and how much it's emitting in annual terms. So those numbers there, the 200, 150, 150 are in tons per year. Now we can move on to the next slide. So the Cherokee Notes. This is a set of 6 documents which were entered into the Cherokee permitting file by the experts who worked on the permit at the time, and which were provided to us by a whistleblower inside the agency. So the actual file shows that starting in very early 2011, which is when this document was made. So this is an email which comes from Xcel, Gary Magdo there, who's their environmental principal, to CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division, saying that they have hired somebody to do modeling and that they've been conducting it on their own. So, the Cherokee site was itself already okay with doing modeling at the time this process started. So let's move on. So the staff, like I said, had been operating in an environment which was very hostile to the idea of doing air quality modeling. They were facing management, which didn't want any obstacles to processing of permits because the agency's revenue stream is partially based on permitting fees in addition to appropriated funds. And so the staff knew that they would have to fight in the event that they wanted to have air quality modeling done on a site, particularly since it was going from coal to natural gas, which was perceptually at least a cleaner energy source that presumably CDPHE was interested in having them do the conversion for them. So this email right here is from one of the staff members to one of their managers, essentially saying, should our top level management decide not to do modeling, we need to remind them that grandfathered sources like this one, which have never been modeled, such as Cherokee, always need to be modeled. Also, very importantly, that this is an environmental justice area. They've known for decades that Cherokee is located in an area which has a lot of poor people living in a lot of pollution, which the other people in Denver are not necessarily exposed to. Also, even though it's going from coal to natural gas, which is this third point here, where it says that net out, that's, if gas is cleaner than coal, then why should they have to model? Well, if there's no modeling that's been done for it, they have to anyway. And finally, the last point here is that there are environmental groups, those bomb-throwing anarchists like ourselves and Sierra Club, and in this case, Wild Earth Guardians, which have already been suing on the point. So if you move to the next slide here, I'll just show you what happened with that Wild Earth Guardians suit. It got denied. Thanks, Obama. Anyway, moving on from there. So the staff over the period of time, we've gone now from September to October, are continuing to elaborate more reasons for modeling. And everybody in the agency knows that there is a huge problem here. Once again, bringing up the environmental justice issues, showing that for design of the stack, which is the big thing that the smoke comes out of on top, they need to know where all of those emissions are going. They need to know, based on the type of turbine that they're using, how it is that different geographical areas will be affected. And once again, pointing out that this is some of the worst air quality in Colorado. And if you move to the next slide, you can see that there are even more reasons. This is all from a printed out document, which was physically handed to the management of CDPHE, making sure that they knew, sort of the same way that a process server will chase you down and hand you a sheet of papers. This was the people in the agency making sure that their management was fully aware of all of the reasons why it is that they had to do modeling to make sure that they knew where these contaminants were going. So, once again, pointing out that this has never been modeled, that the plume impacts are going to be totally different from the coal stacks that had been there before, and that there's no way to know whether or not even the old facility, let alone the new one, was going to comply with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. And then also that because Xcel has already done their own modeling and hired a contractor for it, they know that the agents or the permitted entity is capable of complying with the statutory requirements of making sure that there won't be a violation before issuing a permit. So next slide. So obviously management did not go along with what the staff thought would be a good idea. And here you can see that division management has decided that, no, we don't actually need to do an impact analysis for the modification, and we're just going to approve the permit sight unseen. Obviously the staff was upset about this, and they point this out, and this email is essentially a memo to file pointing out that objection and preserving it for us now in the future. So you can move on. Once again, staff, because there hasn't actually been a final decision issued now, we are at sort of the end of December, and before a final issue or a final issuing of a permit is actually done, is once again showing that, not only do we have all these really good reasons to do modeling before, but also we've done an analysis of the modeling which was done by Xcel. So you can see here the table of emissions that they're talking about here. It's incomplete. It has errors in it. They're not actually showing a net decrease in certain emissions which are taking place. And also, they haven't actually done the math to show how it is that emissions are going to impact people differently than they did when it was a coal plant. I mean, this is sort of a last-ditch effort, but ultimately it's one that is, as we'll see on the final slide here, unsuccessful. So yeah, Xcel comes in and they have a meeting and they sit down and they talk with the folks at CDPHE, and Gary, who, if you'll remember earlier, is the guy who wrote the email in the first of the Cherokee Notes that I have here, thanked the division for the decision not to require modeling on it and to just issue the permit. And they would, in fact, like a letter just stating in writing that they won't have to do that before a permit actually gets issued. There are a few more discussions, which it looks like happened after this. We only have these files to go off of because Colorado, in its infinite wisdom, has implemented a public records policy by which if emails are not affirmatively saved by staff like they were here, they get automatically deleted after like 60 days, which is just wild to me as a FOIA attorney, as the, sort of the primary thing that I do. But yeah, this is basically where the records cease, and we don't really know what else happened with the permit from there, but we know that ultimately modeling was not required, and now, as this facility has been operating for decades, and even though we are looking down the barrel of its ultimate retirement, we still do not ultimately know how it is that the pollution from Cherokee is distributed across the people that live in the area. But we do know from the health impacts that are observable there that emission is falling on somebody, and it continues to disproportionately impact people who live in Commerce City and in and around those poorer and browner and blacker neighborhoods, which really is a bit of an environmental crime. So the final slide here hopefully will make you feel better. These are a bunch of pictures of my dog. Her name is April. She's a training walker coonhound, and she is absolutely delightful. Fortunately, she didn't interrupt me while I was doing this, but yeah, that's basically everything that I had to say about Cherokee. We've given this information and the full versions of some of the documents that I excerpted here directly to both the US EPA and also to Jill Ryan, who runs CDPHE. We have not gotten any real affirmative response from either of those entities that they are interested in doing anything about it. So yeah, it's frustrating, as a lot of environmental work often is, but we are going to continue trying to fight on it. And I really want to thank the folks here and Sierra Club for continuing to fight that with us. And thank you, Mallory, for your kind words about April.
Thanks, Kevin, for that awesome presentation and for your great work exposing the truths about Xcel's plants. All right, I will move us along. Our next we'll hear from Dr. R.T. Karna and Dr. Joel Stroecker, representing the advisory panel and the board of DeSmog Denver, about the health impacts of the pollution from the Cherokee plant. So DeSmog Denver is a nonprofit group of physicians, scientists, nurses, and concerned citizens with the goal of cleaning up Denver's poor air quality. So you can take it away.
Thank you, Ren. Well, first of all, Artie's at work. I think you're muted, Artie, but she's jumped in to join us here. So
here we go.
There you go. On. Go ahead. You can start. Well, I'm going to pipe in here and there. So thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Dr. Karna, and mentioned I am on the advisory committee of DeSmog Denver. I'm also a practicing physician, and this is actually, I want to take the time to talk about this because this is something that is really personally important to me. I am a mom as well, and that really has been quite an eye-opener as far as pollution and health effects for me. I think we can go to the next slide, Ren. I think, we all have been aware that air pollution is not good for us. And I think tonight I want to take the time to talk specifically, what does that mean? Why is it not good for us? What do we do? So gas power plants, or natural gas power plants, as they're often referred to, and it's sort of a misleading, right? Natural, it's natural, but doesn't mean it's necessarily good for us. Gas power plants, they're better than coal plants. Certainly, I think it's a evolution in the right direction, but it's not without it's not without its problems. These power plants emit dangerous compounds like nitric oxide, sulfur compounds, particles like PM 2.5, which all have been really shown to be clearly, in multiple studies, have shown to be linked to asthma, emphysema, COPD, heart attacks, strokes, lung cancer. I mean, the list goes on. It's clear that it does impact our health. Next slide.
Yeah, and I'll take this slide for a minute. So thousands of studies, actually, you guys. So, and we went through in DeSmog Denver, is on our website. I went through hundreds of studies. There are thousands of studies with so much weight of evidence that PM 2.5 and NOx and SOx and ozone are associated with, premature death, all the health conditions and more, what Artie talked about. She's going to give some personal examples here in a minute too, of what she went through, and then also, its effect on children and pregnant women. And it's well known. And in fact, kind of what Kevin was talking about, the closer you are to the emitting source, the worse the health effects. And the first study that really kicked off, air pollution was something called the Harvard 6 Cities study. It was in the 1970s and went all the way to 1991. And they followed 6 cities. They finally had machines that could actually monitor air pollution. So they put them to use in 6 different cities in the United States. It was in the Midwest and the East Coast. And they followed thousands of people over that whole span of 17 years or so. And wherever there was higher concentrations of NOx and PM 2.5, they saw higher death rates and mortality rates and higher rates of heart attacks and strokes and other long-term illnesses. So it's well established, starting with that study, and there are thousands more now. This picture you're seeing is just a recent study. So air monitoring has become much more inexpensive and accessible. And if you go to something called purpleair.com, you can find all kinds of sensors in your city. This is just a picture of a study that was done in Oakland, I believe it was around 2018. And they put sensors all over the city, and this is just NOx. So NOx, you can see, look at the concentrations near the roadways. You know, these sensors were put all over the city and in the middle of blocks and parks. And it's without, you know, any question, you can see here, the concentration of air pollution follows roads, it follows refineries, it follows, you know, power plants. And it becomes a social justice issue because things like power plants, refineries, and highly emitting things are most often in poor neighborhoods of you know, Black and brown people. So this is why it's so important that you know, we start addressing these issues. So I think you can go to the next slide there. But.
Yeah, so you know, I think it's pretty clear. It's very clear how it affects a lot of our adult population. I think for me, that wasn't necessarily a revolutionary knowledge, but I honestly wasn't aware of how it impacts pregnancy and labor specifically. You know, as I mentioned, like becoming a mom sort of was a catalyst for my for me to realize what's really going on with air pollution. I had just a little bit of a background. I had a pretty healthy, uncomplicated pregnancy until it wasn't. And I had a preterm delivery at 24 weeks, a son who was in the ICU for about 2.5 months. He had a chest tube, intubated on the vent, and then on the oxygen, even after we got him home for a while. So in my mind, because I consider myself healthy, I have really no diseases. As I said, I had an uncomplicated pregnancy. For me, it seemed like there is got to be something else. And that's when I came to the realization that air pollution does affect pregnancy. And I wasn't aware of this, but there have been a lot of studies that have actually linked air pollution to preterm labor, to miscarriages. And unfortunately, it doesn't end there. I mean, even if you are lucky to have an uncomplicated child in delivery and you get that child, it's not the end. It's been linked. Studies have shown that it's linked to autism. A lot more clearly than any vaccine has been linked to autism. We actually have evidence-based studies that link air pollution to autism, links to cognitive disorder in children, ADHD, links to depression and anxiety. And hear me, it's an unfortunate trend that we're seeing amongst our youth, children even as young as 11, 10 years old with depression and anxiety, increased suicide rates than ever before. And I'm not saying that that's all due to air pollution. I think there's a lot of factors involved, but I think that air pollution is one thing that we can actually impact and change and sort of change the trajectory for our kids. So it's, I don't think it's a small thing, for us to recognize that. And getting back to the older population, certainly well-known facts about death, stroke, as Dr. Strohecker just mentioned. So, next one.
Yeah, so I'll jump on here. So this is a map here. Little black caps are schools. You see Adams County schools up here in the right. There's Denver Public Schools kind of down in the lower part. The big orange circle is the Suncor refinery, and the next orange circle up there to the left is the Cherokee generating plant. Now, these orange circles don't represent how far the pollution goes. It goes way further than that. But that just shows you these are pollution sources that you're looking at here. Probably the third largest circle there's, I think, the dog food factory. But this is just another example of kind of what Kevin had touched on. It's social justice. I mean, this air pollution is going to waft into some of the most poor and kind of economically challenged neighborhoods in Denver. And as Artie just pointed out, you are polluting into a neighborhood that is going to, disproportionately affect kids' brains, their ability to concentrate, their ability to control their moods. You're giving these kids, a disadvantage, when they already are starting out, some of them disadvantaged. So that's the hard part of this. I wanted to say one other thing, and Dr. Karna is going to finish with another slide here in a second about, the cost of air pollution in it. But I wanted to say one other thing, just to touch back to Kevin. The national ambient air quality standards that are set, for example, PM 2.5 is 12 parts per million, and ozone is 70 parts per billion, and we could 75 for SOx parts per million, I think it is, or billion. All those, there's more studies on our website. The levels that are set by the government are not adequate. Death and disability and medical issues continue to occur all the way down to what is natural to the earth. So a natural level of the earth is 4 parts per million. Sorry, it's four micrograms per meter squared for PM 2.5, and down to like 30 parts per billion of ozone, for example. There's studies that show that as well. So even what we're shooting for is not adequate. And we're not even getting what we're supposed to be shooting for. I bring that up sometimes when I'm talking to people. Even what we're shooting for with our air quality standards is not adequate. And I think it should push all of us to want to get on renewables 100%. So next slide there, Artie.
Yeah, just to sort of, I stress this point, I think it's important to recognize these conditions that we're talking about, these health conditions, they're not a one and done. I mean, these aren't infections that you recover from and then you move on with the rest of your life. These are all chronic conditions. These are conditions that stay with us and our children. These are things that we're going to have to deal with day in, day out. And that's expensive. That's expensive to our health. That's expensive to our finances. The Cherokee Power Plant or Xcel is not going to pay our bills. And these are hospital bills and doctor visits, time off from home if you're sick, your child is sick, time off from work, if you're sick and your child is sick. So these are financial and health impacts that are expensive to us.
Yeah, and I think it's doubly painful when we realize, especially in Colorado, where wind and solar are basically cheaper already than natural gas for Xcel. They're a cheaper form of energy, and that's not factoring in the health costs. That never gets factored in. I think you guys need to keep that in mind. If we knew everybody who's paying bills for asthma attacks, doctor's bills, hospitalizations, early deaths, that money would be exponentially greater than this cost comparison between what fuel is cheapest to run our electricity grid. So I think that's all for us. And Artie, do you have anything else to say? No,
I think the only thing I would say is that I think it's it's a big bad wolf, and I think we have to sort of dismantle it little by little, and I think we can all kind of participate in that.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much. Alrighty, share my screen again, quick. All right, so with that, I'm going to move us on. Our final panelist for the night is my colleague Ian Thomas Tafoya, Colorado field advocate with GreenLatinos. And we actually got out this spring and we made a quick video about the Cherokee plan. And I thought that we could start by sharing that with you all tonight. So without further ado, I will play that.
My name is Ian Thomas Tafoya. I am from Denver, and the neighborhood we're talking about today is Cole, where I grew up and my mother still lives. Well, North Denver is considered one of the most polluted zip codes in America, certainly one of the most polluted zip codes in Colorado. We face soil pollution, air pollution, water pollution. You can see the Cherokee gas plant towers from my mother's front yard. Well, I'm concerned about the Cherokee gas plant because they're continuing to burn fossil fuels. Not only is the evidence and the science real about the impacts of climate crisis, we're seeing also the impacts of this long-term exposure to pollutants in my community. As I said, the higher death rates, mortality, and morbidity, it's real. Xcel Energy is not doing enough. It won't be enough until children in my community can breathe clean air. It won't be enough until we've remediated the harm they've caused to the waterways and the soils in my community. It won't be enough until they move to renewable energy. They claim that these fracked gases are cleaner. They are all dirty fossil fuels. And they're just putting lipstick on a pig. They all emit terrible pollution, which fries the lungs of those in my community. And the cost, it just doesn't make any sense for them to continue to pass off the cost when renewable energies are cost competitive. The communities of North Denver stand together with communities across Colorado and the United States who are under the thumb of Xcel Energy polluting our communities. We've been ignored for far too long. And what I can tell you is my community is educated, empowered, and networked to fight back against polluters and to fight for a better future for us all.
Thanks, y'all. So without further ado, I will pass it along to Ian to introduce himself and share a little bit about the importance of this moment on Xcel Energy.
Great, thank you, Ren, and thank you everyone for watching that video we created. You know, it happened to come out at a very great time that I was working on transportation electrification plans at the Public Utilities Commission. My organization, GreenLatinos, is fighting for environmental liberation. We're just set our 5-year goal, strategic plan, and environmental liberation is our new tagline. And what I can tell you is we are the voice for the unheard. Many of these individuals have been speaking out, but we need to be clear that government only works best when the government is listening and the people are talking. At the time in which we made that video, actually, the whistleblowers hadn't actually come forward to have a conversation about Cherokee gas plant, or you better believe I would have been talking about that. We're just gonna go through a couple slides and then I'm gonna get back to just a couple points I wanna hit home, but I wanna make clear that Xcel Energy is an investor-owned utility, which means there are people that do not live in our community who are making buku bucks while pollution is pouring into our communities. And yes, the lights are staying on, but it's not good enough, as you heard there in the video. I want to make clear that there are cycles, right? There are cycles in life, in government, regulatory policy, to maybe choose another path when it comes to Xcel Energy, how the community of Denver is getting their power, how other communities are getting their power. There are examples of municipal-owned utilities. There are examples of cooperative ownership of utilities where they have more responsiveness to the general public. So I just want to make you aware of that. Next slide, please. So what is an electric resource plan? I'll tell you what, I didn't know exactly that thing either. When people started asking me like, hey, are you gonna participate in the energy resource plan? And I was like, well, I don't know. What is it about? Well, basically, it's a plan that they gotta file at the State Public Utilities Commission that's gonna answer one question. How are they gonna make sure that our electricity turns on at your house and my house, that it's there for peak demand? You know, these are conversations that require policy and investment to get us there in the future. But what we know is when we see the pie graph, we are continually behind on renewable energies, taking up a majority of where our energy is going and ramping down the use of dirty fossil fuels. And again, this transition from one fossil fuel to another is what the next slide is going to be talking about, greenwashing, this idea that something that still is toxic, but just less toxic is still a win for our communities. I want to be clear that greenwashing is not climate justice, that GreenLatinos, that our partners at Sierra Club standing with us, alongside of us, isn't willing to accept less. I think you can look at the legislature this year and the wins that we've had for the creation of environmental justice ombudsmen, the funding of community efforts. We have a strong voice right now, and I think if we can get everybody to show up in a big time way, we can do more to ensure that greenwashing is what we ultimately get as our policy, but that we actually get tangible steps to move forward. Another example of greenwashing, and if you want to take off the screen, that's totally fine, Ren, I want to start right away by saying, you know, I'm coming to you from occupied Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho territory. My indigenous ancestors are Oke-Wingate and Hickory Apache from the headwaters. Naming these facilities after tribal nations is just so wrong. And there was a reason they did it. They did it back then to make it palatable for the general public. They think that they were doing it to make it to honor us. All it's doing is polluting the indigenous descendants of the people who are living in these communities. I want to be clear that yes, there's a cumulative pollution problem here. You saw in the maps from Kevin just how many sources there are. I don't think we have a full documented yet. You know, we've been doing our best over the last few years to build power to fight Suncor. But from my front yard, what that sign at Suncor is a landmark for is a Phillips 66 terminal for a large gas pipeline from Texas. It's a marker of 270, which has a great volume of truck traffic and small particulate matter pollution. It means that Suncor is literally across the street from this facility, and that Metro wastewater is there. So we know we have water pollution. We know we have all these problems. And I just really need to emphasize that, like, the whistleblowers coming forward, these people are heroes. I want to make sure that more people who work in the government know that they should come forward as heroes, that this is a narrative that we need everybody to lift. We can't just let them brush this up under the rug. At the first sign of the whistleblowers, before we knew all the facilities, this is something that my community was very aware of. In our fight against I-70, which also Pure is helping us with, we had done our own modeling showing these things were inaccurate. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get them into the federal court late. But to know now that it was implicated, yeah, it made a lot of darn sense to us. I'll say that there are newspapers calling for the firing of that Gary Kaufman. I would invite you to do the same. I think GreenLatinos is in a place where we cannot continue to have those in power who are being called out rather than for what they've done. And I think that having worked in the government myself, you know, you don't get 5 government employees to come forward, risking their careers, their position that they're in, to do the right thing very often. And so I don't think we should let them brush it off. Yes, we need to see things through. Yes, we should be calling on attorney generals and the government to leave no stone unturned. You know, back to that slide that we saw there about we all pay. I really think that picture shouldn't be Andrew Jackson, but it should be medical bills, right? Because while our communities are checking boxes at healthcare clinics on the regular, you know, asthma, strange sorts of cancer, unknown chronic disorders, which require visit after visit after visit, children missing days of school. This is lost opportunity, lost economic development, and economic potential for families who are choosing to pay medical bills instead of save for houses, for parents who are choosing to pay for medical bills instead of saving for college for their kids. I want to emphasize, you know, there's also opportunities at the federal level with the American Jobs Plan, you know, to call up and talk about just transition. It is about communities like this. It is like about communities across the state of Colorado. Pawnee, for example, wanting to go to a gas plant, we cannot let that interim step exist again. It's not like, we need to imagine, like, if we were going to build something new, we wouldn't go back to the old dial-up phone in an era of Wi-Fi, right? That's that technology sharing, and it does not make any sense, and we need to make sure that that's not possible. I really too want to emphasize Pueblo, Colorado. I know we're here to talk about Denver, but our narratives are united. I think Pueblo is in a very real situation like Commerce City of environmental injustice, people feeling not empowered. But we are showing up there. We are trying to lift their voices, but they literally are getting the pollution from the least efficient facility in Colorado, producing the most greenhouse gases. And these people who live in this community don't even get their power. They get their power from another utility who's jacked up the rates on them so much, paying some of the highest rates in the state of Colorado. So is it not environmental racism if you're not getting cheap power, but you're getting all the pollution? I think so. And so GreenLatinos is going to be a partner with the Sierra Club and other people to unite people from Grand Junction to Pueblo. I want you to know those pictures. We marched 55 days on Xcel during COVID even, right? Because the connection between the pollution they're putting in the air and COVID is very real to that. Lost money and lost lives that we cannot get back, lost years of your life that we cannot get back. And so we will be going back out there to finish. We want to go 100 days for 100% renewable energy. My call to action to you is for you to think about, this is a window of opportunity right now to have the largest influence for the people who get the most power, the largest group of people of power in the state of Colorado. And so, you know, we'll have a window again, but we need to seize on the opportunity while we have it, to demand a mix that makes sense for us. And in Colorado Springs, they were able to do it. Their own utility adopted one of the most progressive plans for themselves. And so we need to make our voices heard. And I'm right there with you. I'm going to march with you. I'm going to phone bank with you. I'm going to testify with you. We're not going to let people out there unprepared for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ian. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here again to bring us home. So thanks again for listening, everyone. As we've learned tonight, Xcel's decision to keep burning fracked gas and fossil fuels overall in neighborhoods has serious implications, and especially for some of our most vulnerable communities here in Colorado. And as we see a culture of widespread air quality violations and illegal permitting continuing to come to light in Colorado, we need to take matters into our own hands to protect our climate and our public health. So thankfully, we have a really huge opportunity to change all of this in Xcel's new electric resource plan filed in March that Ian mentioned, the ERP. We need to do everything that we can to get state regulators to approve an excellent ERP, which doesn't invest any further in gas plants like Cherokee when we have viable alternatives. So to help us stay up to date, I've got 2 resources for you. Both are spaces where we share monthly updates and action opportunities to help move Xcel towards clean energy. So first, you can sign up for the Xcelerate Climate Action newsletter, which comes out on the first Friday of every month. And a huge shout out to the volunteer team that I'm blessed to work with, the Denver Beyond Coal team, for helping to conceptualize and execute our newsletters monthly. So our next issue will come out this Friday, and it will actually have a feature about illegal air quality violations by another of Xcel's plants, the Pawnee Coal Plant near Fort Morgan. And second, I'm so excited to invite you to the Xcelerate Climate Action Coalition, XCAC, a group that I'm forming with the support of 350 Colorado and Clean Energy Action to stay organized and keep the pressure on Xcel over the course of this ERP filing process. So normally we meet on the first Tuesdays of each month. Heads up, in July, it will be the second Tuesday of the month, so July 13th, because of the holiday. But we get together to share Xcel news and action opportunities that you can then take to your friends, family, organization, or community. So it'd mean the world to me if you could join our Xcelerate Climate Action Coalition. I'm dropping a few links here in the chat. Oops, just kidding, that didn't work. I will drop a few links here in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. But there's a bit.ly short link to sign up for the Xcel newsletter, and there's a Google form to sign up for the Xcelerate Climate Action Coalition. I also, in 1 second here, I'm going to share a quick, literally 1 question survey, just to hear how you all found out about this event for further recruitment efforts. Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation for tonight. And now we can move into some Q&A. Do we have any questions for our panelists? I'm going to check the chat. Cool. So we have 1 comment in the chat from Mallory. I'm aware that Xcel is moving toward renewable energy generation, such as solar, wind, and hydro. They also have the goal of clean energy by 2050. Do you foresee hope for the future of energy generation due to these changes Xcel is attempting to make? Yes, definitely. Xcel is moving in the right direction, and it's always just kind of a complicated dance that we play with Xcel, because while they have made some significant strides and some progress towards clean energy, that's just simply not the full picture of, the way that they resource their energy generation in Colorado. Xcel does have some exciting clean energy goals. And at the time that they announced those goals, it was, certainly unprecedented. But since then, many utilities, including some in Colorado, have, come out ahead of Xcel with newer and more ambitious plans. As the climate crisis continues to ramp up and we see more and more devastating effects, I think, increasingly we're seeing utilities move ahead their pledges and increasingly skip over investments in gas and move directly to renewable energy from fossil fuels. So Yeah, I think Xcel definitely, is moving in the right direction, but I think that there's more that we can do to push them along farther and even further accelerate it. I mean, at the end of the day, Xcel is planning to burn coal in Colorado, 10 years longer than any other utility. And that's still something that we should talk about, even if they do have goals. Any other panelists want to add to that?
I would just like to add that, this, not just they're supplying it, right? So we have to be working on demand at the same time. And so bills that have to do with buildings, building new infrastructure for gas, for fracked gas, we have to do something to curb that at the same time. We're going to have to make action in other places. But if I had to be honest, goals from a corporation are not something that I hang my hat on. It's going to require us getting out there. And again, I want you to be thinking about cycles for taking back the power yourself. Yes, they've defeated ballot initiatives in Pueblo and in other places, but sometimes we lose and we have to keep going back if we want to win. That's how we build power. I know that the individuals in Pueblo are feeling that way. I know that I personally am looking at 2026 when it comes to the franchise here in Denver. We need to be thinking about community-based solar and ways to break their stranglehold on energy generation. And these are all pieces of the puzzle. But do I have a lot of faith in Xcel Energy? I wouldn't be marching on them if I did.
That's a good way to sum that up. But yeah, I think that a lot of what Ian just named is getting at our plan to continue to address these pollution issues. But the ERP process and specifically helping to remove barriers to participation in public environmental regulation and barriers to giving public comments is definitely what I see as a big goal of mine as an organizer. I think the PUC is just one place where there is a lot of potential to make change and to move the needle on environmental justice and clean energy, and one place where a lot of that potential is untapped because a lot of people are blocked from participating. So yeah, I want to continue to help to remove some of those barriers by educating communities and connecting folks to opportunities to work on Xcel. And I think that, eventually we will get there. Cool. Alrighty. I don't think that there's any other questions in the chat. Feel free to come off mute and shout out your question if anybody else does have a question. We got a couple minutes here. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thanks so much again, everyone, for joining. It was great to see you. I will follow up with some more information and all of the links that I shared over email. But yeah, have a great evening. Take care, everyone.